When Amber was 12 years old, we were going through a difficult period of time with her health while we were at the hospital. I had been reading Luke chapter 8 about the woman who was sick and touched Jesus' garment and he healed her. And I went over to Amber's bed and wrapped my arms around her and began to pray, God, we are touching your garment by faith through prayer. That is what inspired the song, Touching Your Garment. I'm touching your garment by faith through prayer.
We both grew up in Canton, Ohio. We met at our home church. We were in youth group together. Actually sang in a singing group when we were junior and senior in high school or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And we started dating at the beginning of our senior year of high school. Yeah. So if I could say this, Vicky's a year older than me, and so, but she always looked at me. Well, the reason I'm saying that is because you always looked at me as like a little kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Probably still do. No. But looked at me as a little kid, but it wasn't until like our senior year that you actually looked at me as somebody that you would go out with, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we started dating our senior year in high school and dated all through our senior year. And then we went off to the same college together. We both went to Baptist University of America in Atlanta, Georgia, and dated all through our 4 years of college. And then we were married 2 weeks after we graduated from college.
We were serving at a church in Atlanta, and Dr. Sisk came through. He was doing a missions conference there.
And so then we took the speaker, Dr. Don Sisk, out to lunch, and we asked him, Dr. Sisk, in your opinion, where's the neediest place in the world? And his answer was Japan. And Vicky immediately dismissed Japan. Yeah, so then we asked him, what is the second neediest place in the world in your opinion? And he said Mexico City.
Our kids started coming into the home. Justin was born 2 years before we went to Mexico City. So when we got to Mexico City, he was already, he was there being able to play with the neighbor kids and everything. We were going to language school. And then we waited because we weren't to have children. They didn't want us to get pregnant during language school, believe it or not. Mark came along and he was born there in Mexico City after we had moved 4 years later. And then 4 years after that, Amber came along. When Amber came along, we had an ultrasound about 3 weeks before she was born. Found out she was a girl, that we were going to have a little girl, and we were thrilled.
I remember viscerally the day that she was born, maybe because as an 8-year-old I was able to leave school for the day, but I remember Dad came and picked us up from school, and I have visually this image of us walking out of the school and Dad saying, we're going to go meet your little sister. And it was a pretty meaningful experience.
Being just 4 years old when Amber was born, I can't think of a time without Amber. So I remember her when she was just a small toddler, and I was about 6 years old, and she was there, and she was just always laughing. She loved to just play, and if people would joke around with her and blow raspberries on her belly, oh my word, she just loved it, and she would laugh. I have a specific memory of in our home in Mexico where we were opening up our Easter baskets, and she was there and she was just smiling, and we would get some stuff and we'd show it and we'd go over and see what she had in her basket, even though it was so much different than what we had in our basket. And we'd show her and she just had the biggest, sweetest, most beautiful smile on her face, and it was just such a special moment.
When Amber was about a year old, no one had ever used the term cerebral palsy for Amber. And someone recommended that I reach out to a lady who had a child similar to Amber. And so I called her on the phone, and I was talking to her about Amber's condition just to kind of share. She said to me over the phone, she said, this is cerebral palsy. That's what your daughter has, which is basically, brain damage that is irreversible. I was like, she said, have the doctors not used that term with you? I said, no. And so then from that point on, I began to say that to the doctors, is this what this is? It was so new to us. I guess we were kind of naive. We didn't
Very
really
naive.
know, and we understood epilepsy because that's seizures, but we didn't understand cerebral palsy. That was what basically she is diagnosed with, is cerebral palsy and epilepsy. In the beginning, Amber would smile. She would laugh if you kind of shook her a little bit. There was one gentleman in the church in Mexico, and he would carry her around, and he would just go, just a little shake like that. And Amber would just giggle, giggle, giggle. So she could giggle and laugh.
So she also cannot sit up.
She cannot
She
sit.
cannot roll over in bed.
Not anymore.
She literally can do nothing for herself.
She used to do a little more when she was younger.
Mhm.
You could even hold her, and she would stand. But, after a while, she just lost all that.
As a child and having Amber as a sister, my childhood looked a lot different than a lot of other people's. It wasn't better or worse, but I think it was unique and special.
The single most formative aspect of growing up in a home with someone in Amber's condition is having a front row seat to vulnerability and to weakness, and to being near someone who does not have the power to actually care for or protect themselves. I've found in my leadership and my outlook in life and my approach to ministry, there's just a heightened sensitivity and awareness to the vulnerable. That's one of the key components of the kingdom of Jesus Christ.
And so while we experienced incredible hardships and difficulties because of Amber's condition, it brought about such value and hope and joy in the midst of really difficult times. And so would I change Amber? There's things that I wish Amber got a chance to experience, but I also know that she is going to have a special place in glory and a special seat in God's presence because of what she endured. And I got the blessings of learning some valuable wisdom from a girl that can't say a word.
Amber has been probably the biggest blessing in our lives. She has taught us all, Vicki and I, and Justin and Mark included, so many lessons. I think her condition has made us more compassionate towards people that have special needs kids. I think it's her condition has obviously made us more dependent upon the Lord, no doubt about that. And I think it's given us a hope of the future. Even this morning we were talking about Romans chapter 8, where Paul talks about, the suffering of this present time does not compare with the glory that will be revealed in us. And for us, the future is so exciting. For us, one day, the very first time we will ever speak with our daughter that she understands, the very first conversation we ever have with her will be glory.
There's this kind of formative force in the world's culture that embraces and elevates power and strength and intelligence and competence and capacity. And the kingdom of Jesus elevates weakness and dependence. It doesn't elevate the types of values that the world does. It elevates all sorts of other values that the world tends to diminish or even make less of. And so growing up in a home where you're constantly dealing with vulnerability and you're constantly faced with weakness shaped in me from a very early age, unbeknownst to me, by God's grace, I think a kingdom lens to view things that otherwise, I know, the way that God has wired me and designed me, had it not been for Amber's role and presence in my life, those lessons would have been hard to come by.
I believe with all of my heart that God communicates with her in a way that we do not know. We've come to the conviction that God would not create a human being without giving them the capacity to communicate with them.
Right.
So we believe, we don't know how, but we believe somehow God communicates with her. And so we have always laughed through the years that every once in a while Amber will be in her bedroom and she'll just start giggling randomly. She'll just start giggling. And we've just always made the comment, God's speaking to her.
It's this joy that can only come through a gift from God. We have the ability and the privilege of experiencing joy from so many things in this world, whether it's good food or relationships, conversations, what we see, what we hear. Amber doesn't have that opportunity. And so the joy that she experiences isn't from a good meal. The joy she experiences isn't from a boy that she has a crush on. The joy she experiences is a gift from God, a unique gift from God in that moment. So there was this time when I was living in Florida after college, and Amber hadn't expressed a lot of emotion in a really long time. And we were watching a high school basketball game, and we were all there together. And then randomly, Amber just started cracking up hysterically. Amber hadn't done that in a really long time. And so that joy was such a pure joy. And it wasn't a joy based on circumstances. There wasn't anything that was necessarily happening that brought that about. But that was such a genuine inner joy that came out that was contagious to everybody around her. No matter what anybody was going through in that moment, the fact that she was cracking up, it changed everybody's day around. And all of a sudden that joy was not just a joy that was coming out of Amber, but it was a joy that was experienced by everybody that was around her. So often our emotions are dictated so much by what we experience, and we preach and we talk about a joy that comes from the inner depths of our soul that isn't dependent on the world around us. And in that moment, Amber experienced a joy from the depths of her soul that wasn't a response to anything happening around us, but was just a gift from her Lord in that moment. And it was a gift that didn't end with her, but a gift that impacted lives around her that day.
Unfortunately, I think in our society, people that are faced with Amber's conditions, many people have shame about that. And so to be around a family that doesn't necessarily have that type of shame and allow people to be able to get to know our family and know that Amber's a part of our family, just being around Amber and being around a family that cares for Amber in that way and seeing her limitations, it immediately puts your life into perspective. You can't be around Amber for long without beginning to question your lack of gratitude, without beginning to question the things that you take for granted. And so we've often kind of joked, our whole family has been engaged and involved in vocational ministry. Dad's a pastor, brother's a pastor, I've been in pastoral ministry, and yet Amber has probably had a greater ministry impact than all of us, and she's never spoken a word. Amber's just mere presence. God has used it in our lives to shape the way that we do ministry, but God has used it in hundreds of other people's lives to push them to reflect on things that, had it not been for the presence of someone like Amber, they may have just taken for granted.
As long as Amber has been alive and gone through difficulties, it has always been a reality and understanding that heaven is going to be such a better place. I mean, it's a better place for all of us, but we've known that heaven is the place of healing that we long for. And so we've just waited for God to do that, and we have not understood why. I've not understood why God hasn't done that. And time again, God reveals what he's doing. And it might not be the way I do it, but it's lives that are transformed in ways that wouldn't have been transformed otherwise.
We were living in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the time, and we were members of Highland Park Baptist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I traveled a lot and was preaching, but there were certain Sundays that I was home. And on a given Sunday, we got to church early and had put Amber in the nursery, and Vicki and I walked out and sat down in the auditorium, and we had grabbed, the church produced a newspaper, a weekly or a monthly newspaper called The Evangelist. And I was reading the testimonies of these athletes, and there was one young man who was a basketball player who was sharing his testimony and said that basketball had always been his idol, and he had always struggled because basketball was first in his life. And this year he had to do some type of Christian service, and he thought, what would be the easiest Christian service he could do? And he thought, well, I can work in the nursery. And he made the statement, I'll never forget the statement. He said, I never realized that I would meet someone who would change my life. And he went on to talk about how in the nursery he was taking care of this little girl who couldn't see, who couldn't walk, who couldn't talk. And I remember reading it and showing Vicki the article and saying, he's talking about Amber.
There was actually an opening, and someone asked if I would sub for them one night, to be in the children's ministry there. And so I took it upon myself to go ahead and sub for them. And then, long story short, it just fell into the place where I was able to meet Amber, and everything just kind of, fell into place. And I was really excited to, be a part of that program. And then I just kind of became a mainstay, and even though they didn't need me anymore, I still volunteered and wanted to be a part of that because, Amber was in that children's ministry, and her impact on me was just, it still impacts me to this day. It's been incredible. So I played at Tennessee Temple University for college basketball and loved the basketball aspect of it from there. I was raised in a Christian home, and had good, strong moral values and ethics. And, I was saved at the age of 6, and then moving on, kind of rededicated my life in college because, we all fall away at times, and I just wasn't really probably doing some of the right things. But truthfully, Amber kind of got me refocused and recentered upon what was really important in life rather than just focusing on basketball strictly. Before I met Amber, basketball was kind of the end-all be-all for me, seriously. I would just really focus on winning, making myself better, improve my body physically, training. I was really driven, but a lot of it wasn't for the right reasons. It was more selfish ambition, just wanting to win to kind of curb that fire inside of me. But when I met Amber, it kind of quenched a whole different thirst that I had, just a whole different avenue that I went down. And quite honestly, it kind of grounded me a little bit on what's really important. Honestly, I could say there's a lot of times where I'm probably here today because of Amber, in the direction with basketball and being a coach. I'd say that really impacted me to where I'm still here today.
If you could say anything to Amber right now, what would you tell her?
I'd first want to say thank you. Thank you for being who she is, being a real impact on my life, changing my vision as far as what life should be about. Even if she couldn't hear me, just to be able to whisper in her ear and say, Amber, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your story, for your, for her being her, dealing with a lot of depression and stuff, just being able to count on, my faith and everything moving forward has really helped me, like I said, to survive to this day, because otherwise I quite honestly wouldn't be here. And just seeing Amber's picture again has kind of kept that motivation and intact for me.
I can't imagine how a human body goes through the types of things that her body has gone through and survives. I mean, just the amount of constant pressure and pain and frustration, and without the ability even to be able to articulate those things. And so just her mere constant existence is testimony to, of course, God's sustaining grace, but I think God's creative grace in how He designed her, that she's resilient, she's strong, and that you still, 30 years later, despite so much medication, despite so much complexity, you still see glimpses of who she is, glimpses of her joy. It just shows that perseverance with which God has gifted her and that God has sustained in her.
I have said repeatedly that Amber is probably the strongest person that I've ever met. So Amber has gone through major surgeries without shedding a tear. I mean, surgeries that I would cry and scream and bawl over. She handles them like a trooper. Now maybe it's a little bit of a neurological issue, I'm not sure, but this girl has been through, I mean, we could just go through the list. Spinal fusion surgery, 2 rods from her neck all the way down to her back, 2 broken hips, both balls in her hips have been excised, pneumonia, I don't know how many times, abscesses in her lungs. And this girl has gone through it over and over and over again. And we jokingly say that she never complains. And obviously from a verbal point of view, she can't do that. But her endurance is remarkable.
Amber might be one of the most resilient people I know, to be in her situation. And, just a human condition that just kind of, when life throws, enough stuff your way, you kind of give up. Amber's not like that. Amber hasn't given up. She's got something inside her that keeps driving her. And I think there's still people that need to be impacted by her. And I think that's why she's still on this earth today.
It doesn't make sense to me how she has withstood all of these things. Like the endurance and the perseverance that she has shown through her physical life is mind-boggling to me. And the only explanation I can come up with is divine strength. Like the only thing that makes sense as to how she has been able to endure hardship after hardship after hardship is the fact that she's not working with just the strength of a young woman. Like she is working with God's divine power to get through some of life's most difficult things. And yet, in the midst of my smallest of hardships, I convince myself that this is the end and that I can't get through. Amber's example and message of her life is one that God's strength is so much stronger than whatever this world can throw our way. Like whether it's physical disability, whether it's emotional, psychological, whatever it might be, whatever those challenges are that this world throws, Amber's story is the poster child that God's power is stronger than that. That God's strength can get us through the most difficult of situations. Amber's story reveals the reality that no matter the pain we experience, no matter the struggle we find ourselves in, God is bigger than those things. How can you look at Amber's life and say, no, God's not strong enough to get me through this? No, God's going to get us through whatever we endure. He's done it with Amber time and time again, and He's going to keep doing it with me and with all of us.
If she could communicate, if she could speak, what do you think Amber would want those who are watching this to be able to know?
So that was the hardest question that you said. That was a difficult question for us, and it is.
I told Brian, I said, I feel like she would say, God is good. He's faithful. I may be suffering, but God is still good.
I think she would say, God is good.
I think she would tell us about wonders of God's love and goodness that we aren't able to experience in the way that she is and that she has.
And you look at her life and you might ask, how is that even possible? But Amber has, in a unique way, been in the valleys. Amber has been in the difficulties. And it's in the hardship that God's goodness is magnified.
I believe there's a type of intimacy that Amber has with the Lord that is unique and different than any of ours. And so I would suspect that she would tell us about these grand wonders of God's love that have been difficult maybe for us to understand in light of our condition and circumstances. But because of the way God operates and God works, have been things that have been so obviously clear and concrete to her.
And so that I know that if Amber could participate in this, that her story wouldn't be all of the hard things that she's gone through. No, I think her message would mimic Paul's, who the Apostle Paul went through challenge after challenge, and yet his message was rejoice. Rejoice, and again I say rejoice. Not in the circumstances of life, but in the goodness of a God who loves us even in the circumstances of life. I have no idea what God has in store for her future. I do know that He has surprised us over and over and over again with how He has used her. And so I don't doubt that He's going to continue doing that. I don't doubt that there are new lives that are going to be changed by Amber's story. Because I know that God's not just going to keep her here just to suffer. Like, He obviously has a purpose for this. And to say that because I think that she should go to heaven and escape this, I mean, that's completely missing what God has already done and what He can continue to do. I have no idea what it looks like, but I'm confident that God's going to continue to use her in ways that we can't even imagine.
When my heart is torn and